Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. After 5 years of saving every penny and living in a cramped apartment, I finally did it. I bought my dream house. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but it was perfect for me. The house sat about 200 feet back from the main road, connected by a long gravel driveway that wound through what the realtor called your own private meadow. That half-acre patch of land with its old oak trees was what sealed the deal for me. I could already picture myself setting up a workshop out there, maybe starting a garden or just enjoying the peaceful buffer it provided from the street noise. I work as a software engineer, which means I appreciate details and like to plan things out methodically. Moving into this house felt like the culmination of years of careful budgeting and planning. The property survey was crystal clear about the boundaries, and I had all my paperwork organized in a neat folder within the first week of moving in. The trouble started almost immediately after I settled in. My new next-door neighbor introduced herself on my second day by marching over to complain about where I'd placed my trash cans for collection. She didn't even say hello first. Just launched into a lecture about how the previous owners always kept their bins further back from the street because it looked more presentable. I figured she was just particular about appearances and tried to brush it off. Over the next few weeks, I noticed this neighbor and her family would occasionally set up picnics in my meadow area near the road. At first, I was mildly annoyed but decided to let it slide. I was busy unpacking boxes and getting settled, and I didn't want to start off on the wrong foot with the neighbors. Maybe they genuinely didn't know where the property line was, I thought. I'd clear it up eventually when the opportunity presented itself naturally. That opportunity came on a Saturday morning when I was mowing my lawn. I spotted her setting up folding chairs and a small table in the meadow, clearly preparing for some kind of gathering. I turned off the mower and walked over, planning to politely explain the situation. I approached her with what I hoped was a friendly smile. I explained that I wasn't sure if the previous owners had mentioned it, but this part of the property was actually mine according to the deed and survey. She looked at me like I'd just told her the earth was flat. She laughed dismissively and told me not to be silly, that this was obviously a community space. According to her, the last owner let everyone use it, and it was basically a neighborhood park. I tried to remain patient and explained that I understood it might have been used that way before, but my official documents clearly showed it was part of my lot. I mentioned that I had plans for the space and would appreciate it if she'd respect the property boundaries. That's when her demeanor completely shifted. She got defensive immediately, telling me how incredibly selfish I was being. In her mind, I couldn't just buy a house and kick everyone out of what she considered the neighborhood park. She informed me quite loudly that she had rights. She packed up her things in a dramatic huff, making sure everyone within a 3-block radius could see how upset she was. As she stormed back to her house, I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A few weeks passed peacefully, and I started to think maybe she'd gotten the message. Then came that Saturday evening that changed everything. I'd been out running errands and came home around 6 in the evening to find what could only be described as a full-scale block party happening on my property. There were at least a dozen cars parked all over my meadow, their tires creating ruts in the grass I'd been carefully maintaining. More vehicles lined my private driveway, and one SUV was parked so close to my garage that I couldn't even get my own car into my own driveway. The noise was incredible. There was loud music pumping from portable speakers, kids screaming and running around a bounce house that someone had set up, and dozens of adults standing around with drinks in their hands. I sat in my car for a moment, just staring at the scene in disbelief. Then I got out and started looking for my neighbor, who I assumed had to be behind this chaos. I found her near the bounce house, wearing a party dress and holding a glass of wine. Before I could even open my mouth, she spotted me and immediately went on the offensive. She asked if she could help me with something, using the tone you'd use with a door-to-door salesman who was interrupting your dinner. I told her this was my private property and that she had dozens of people trespassing on my land. I pointed out that one of her guests was blocking my garage and that this whole situation needed to stop immediately. She rolled her eyes and told me she wasn't going to ruin her daughter's birthday party because I was on some kind of power trip. According to her, they weren't hurting anything, and I needed to relax. I insisted that at minimum, the cars blocking my driveway needed to be moved so I could access my own garage. She refused outright and told me to get a life. That's when I realized this woman had no intention of being reasonable. I announced that if the cars weren't moved, I'd have them towed. I figured that would get her attention and force her to take this seriously. Instead, she pulled out her phone and declared she was calling the police on me. What happened next was surreal. I stood there listening as she made what could only be described as a completely fabricated emergency call. She told the dispatcher that her neighbor was threatening her guests and trying to illegally block a public right-of-way. She claimed I was acting erratically and that she feared for her family's safety. Her voice got increasingly hysterical as she described how I was supposedly preventing people from accessing what she called a public area. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was actually calling the cops on me for standing in my own yard and asking people not to trespass on my property. About 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up. The officers got out and immediately surveyed the scene. Dozens of people partying in what looked like an open field, and me standing calmly by my front door. Given the frantic nature of the call they'd received, they approached cautiously. My neighbor immediately rushed over to the officers, pointing at me dramatically while launching into her victim act. She was practically in tears, telling them how I'd threatened her guests and was trying to prevent people from using public access. The lead officer walked over to me with a skeptical expression. He said they'd received a report of a disturbance and asked me to explain what was going on. I kept my voice calm and level as I explained that this woman was hosting a party on my private property without permission. Her guests were trespassing and blocking my driveway, and when I asked her to have them move, she called the police. My neighbor immediately started shouting that I was lying, insisting this was public access and calling me crazy. That's when I played my ace card. I told the officer I had my property survey and deed right inside the house and asked if he'd like to see them. I went inside and grabbed my organized folder of documents. The county-stamped survey map clearly showed the entire driveway and meadow belonged to my property. I also showed my driver's license with the matching address. The officer's whole demeanor changed as he looked over the paperwork. He studied the survey map, then walked the property line with me, using the metal stakes that were still visible from when the land was originally surveyed. You could practically see the light bulb going on as he realized what was really happening here. The officer went back to my neighbor and informed her that she was, in fact, trespassing on private property. He told her that all her guests needed to move their vehicles immediately or they would be ticketed and potentially towed. The humiliation on her face was something to behold. She had to walk around to all her party guests and explain that they needed to move their cars because apparently this wasn't public land after all. The party atmosphere died instantly as people scrambled to relocate their vehicles and figure out where else they could park. After the chaos of cars leaving died down, the officer came back to me with some advice. He strongly recommended that I clearly mark my property boundaries to prevent this kind of situation from happening again. He suggested putting up a fence, or at least some no trespassing signs, explaining that it would make any future calls like this much simpler to resolve. I thanked him for the advice and told him I would take care of it immediately. As the police cars drove away and the last of the party guests departed, I stood in my now quiet meadow and realized this was far from over. My neighbor had just been publicly humiliated, and I doubted she'd take that lying down. That night, I sat at my computer and started researching. My engineering background kicked in, and I approached this like any other project that needed a systematic solution. I spent hours reading local ordinances about fencing, gates, and signage to make sure whatever I did would be completely legal and compliant with all regulations. By Monday morning, I had a plan. First, I ordered several professional-grade aluminum signs from a company that specialized in security signage. These weren't going to be simple, no trespassing signs. I had them custom-made to read, private property, access by permission only, 24 hours video surveillance in use, trespassers will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Then I added the police report number from my neighbor's own call to the police. I figured if she was going to involve law enforcement, she might as well be reminded of it every time she looked at my property. But the signs were just the beginning. The real masterpiece was going to be the gate. I contacted a company that specialized in automatic driveway gates and had them come out for a consultation. I explained that I wanted a high-end professional installation right at the entrance of my driveway where it met the road. After reviewing my property survey and local codes, they designed a beautiful black iron gate that would require either a remote control or keypad code for entry. The gate system included all the safety features required by law, pressure sensors to prevent it from closing on vehicles, emergency release mechanisms for first responders, and proper warning lights. I wasn't going to give anyone ammunition to claim it was unsafe or illegal. I also contacted a security company about installing high-definition cameras to cover the gate area, the entire meadow, and my driveway. After the party incident, I realized I needed video evidence of any future problems. The installation process took about a week, and I have to say, watching my neighbor's face during that week was almost as satisfying as the final result. Every day she'd come outside and stare as workers installed fence posts, ran electrical lines, and mounted cameras. Her expression grew more horrified each day as she realized the scope of what was happening. The day the gate became operational was a moment of pure triumph. I tested it multiple times, watching it smoothly open and close with the remote control. The cameras provided crystal clear footage of anyone approaching the entrance. The signs were visible from a considerable distance, making it impossible for anyone to claim they didn't know this was private property. My neighbor couldn't contain herself any longer. She marched over that evening, fuming about the ugly gate and creepy cameras. She threatened to sue me and complained to the city about what she called an eyesore. She was particularly upset about the cameras, claiming they were invasive and probably illegal. I calmly informed her that all installations were fully compliant with city codes and had been installed based on the direct advice of the police officer she herself had called. I had all the permits and documentation to prove everything was legal. Her threats went nowhere because I'd done my homework. The real satisfaction came a few weeks later when she decided to have a yard sale. I watched from my living room window as car after car tried to turn into my driveway to park, only to be met by the closed gate and prominent private property signs. Confused shoppers had to drive past and find parking much further down the street. Her yard sale was a complete flop. People didn't want to walk several blocks just to look at used furniture and old clothes. I could see her getting increasingly frustrated as potential customers drove by without stopping, unwilling to deal with the parking situation. Meanwhile, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, enjoying the peace and quiet of my now secure property. The gate kept out not just trespassers, but also the door-to-door salespeople, religious solicitors, and random strangers who used to cut through my driveway as a shortcut. The initial expense of the gate and security system was significant, probably around $8,000 all told. But the peace of mind was absolutely priceless. I'd successfully secured my dream property from an entitled neighbor by simply following a police officer's advice to the letter. Every time my neighbor looked out her window, she was reminded of how her attempt to use the police against me had backfired spectacularly. The gate stood as a permanent physical reminder of her arrogance and the consequences of trying to take what wasn't hers. The property value aspect was an unexpected bonus. When I had my house appraised 6 months later for insurance purposes, the appraiser noted that the security features and clear property boundaries actually increased the value. Meanwhile, my neighbor's house now looked directly at what she considered an eyesore, which couldn't have helped her own property value. The whole experience taught me an important lesson about standing up for yourself when you're in the right. I'd tried being polite and reasonable, but some people only understand firm boundaries backed up by consequences. My neighbor learned that when you try to take what isn't yours, you might just lose more than you bargained for. These days, my property is exactly the peaceful retreat I dreamed of when I bought it. The gate opens smoothly every time I come home, the cameras give me complete peace of mind when I'm away, and my meadow remains pristine and private. I've started that garden I'd planned, set up a small workshop in the back, and even added a fire pit for evening relaxation. My neighbor and I maintain a polite but distant relationship now. She nods when we see each other, but there are no more property disputes or midnight party phone calls to the police. The boundaries are crystal clear, both literally and figuratively. Sometimes I sit in my meadow in the evening, listening to the quiet sounds of nature instead of screaming children and loud music. The old oak trees provide shade for my reading chair, and the cameras silently watch over everything, ensuring my peace isn't disturbed again. The best part is knowing that this solution was entirely her idea. If she hadn't called the police that night, the officer never would have advised me to secure my property boundaries. Her own actions led directly to the permanent reminder of her failed attempt to claim my land as her own. I've thought about what I might have done differently, but honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. Being patient and methodical paid off in the end. The documentation I'd kept, the legal research I'd done, and the professional installation I'd chosen all combined to create an airtight solution that couldn't be challenged or reversed. Every morning when I drive through my gate and it closes securely behind me, I'm reminded that sometimes the best revenge is simply protecting what's yours and letting entitled people face the natural consequences of their own actions. My neighbor wanted to play games with property rights and police calls, but she learned that some games have permanent consequences. The gate, the cameras, and the signs aren't just security features anymore. They're a daily reminder that when someone tries to take advantage of your kindness and reasonableness, sometimes the best response is to make sure they can never do it again. And thanks to my neighbor's own call to the police, I had the perfect legal justification for every single security measure I installed. Looking back, I almost want to thank her. My property is more secure, more valuable, and more peaceful than I ever imagined it could be. And every time she looks out her window at that ugly gate, she's reminded of the day she learned that calling the police on someone for standing in their own yard might not go the way you expect it to. Update: 6 months later, the consequences keep coming. Well, Reddit, It's been 6 months since I installed my gate and security system, and I thought you'd enjoy hearing how this story continued to unfold. The aftermath has been even more satisfying than I expected. First, let me address some questions from my original post. Yes, the gate cost about $8,000 total, including installation and permits. Yes, it was worth every penny. And yes, my neighbor is still living next door, though our relationship has definitely changed. The most immediate change was how quiet my property became. No more random people cutting through my driveway, no more door-to-door salespeople, and definitely no more unauthorized parties. The gate system sends me a notification on my phone every time someone approaches, so I always know when I have legitimate visitors. About 2 months after the installation, something interesting happened. My neighbor tried to sell her house. I noticed the real estate signs going up and figured she'd finally had enough of looking at my eyesore every day. That's when things got really entertaining. I happened to be working in my garden when the first potential buyers came to look at her house. From my position behind the oak trees, I could hear the realtor trying to give his sales pitch while the buyers kept asking questions about the gate and cameras pointing toward the property. The realtor clearly hadn't been briefed about the situation and couldn't explain why there was such heavy security next door. One couple asked if there had been crime problems in the neighborhood. Another family wanted to know if I was running some kind of business that required that level of security. The realtor kept having to call my neighbor to come outside and explain the situation, which of course made her relive her humiliation each time. After the third set of buyers asked pointed questions about neighborhood disputes, the realtor apparently demanded the full story from my neighbor. I know this because I could hear them having a heated conversation in her backyard afterward. The realtor was not happy about being blindsided by what he called material information that should have been disclosed up front. The house stayed on the market for 4 months. In our area, most houses sell within 6 weeks, so this was unusually long. I noticed the price dropped twice during that time. Eventually, she took it off the market completely. I suspect she realized she couldn't get the price she wanted while potential buyers were being scared off by questions about the fortress next door. Around that same time, I got an unexpected visit from someone claiming to be her lawyer. He was a young guy who looked like he'd just passed the bar exam, and he seemed nervous from the moment I opened the door. He informed me that his client was considering legal action over my excessive and intimidating security measures. I invited him in and offered him coffee while I pulled out my folder of documentation. I showed him all my permits, the compliance certificates, the police report from the original incident, and most importantly, the recording I had of the officer advising me to secure my property boundaries. The young lawyer's confidence visibly deflated as he realized how thoroughly I documented everything. When I mentioned that the security measures were installed on direct police advice following his client's own emergency call, he started backpedaling fast. He mumbled something about needing to review the situation further and left without making any actual threats. I never heard from him again, but I did hear through neighborhood gossip that my neighbor had paid him a consultation fee for nothing. Apparently, he'd told her she had no legal ground to stand on since everything was properly permitted and installed following police advice. The best part came during the summer when she tried to host another outdoor event. This time, it was supposedly a small barbecue for her family, but I could see from my cameras that she'd invited at least 20 people. The problem was, with my gate blocking easy access to what she'd previously used as overflow parking, her guests had nowhere to put their cars. They ended up parking up and down the street, blocking neighbors' driveways and mailboxes. Within an hour, I watched from my porch as 3 different neighbors came out to complain about blocked access to their own properties. One elderly gentleman had to walk 4 blocks to reach his own mailbox because someone had parked directly in front of it. The final straw came when a delivery truck couldn't make it down the street because of all the illegally parked cars. The driver called the police to report the traffic obstruction, and 2 officers showed up to start writing parking tickets. My neighbor had to interrupt her own party to go beg her guests to move their cars before they all got fined. I couldn't help but smile as I watched the chaos unfold. The same woman who'd called the police on me for standing in my own yard was now dealing with actual police enforcement against her own guests for legitimate parking violations. But the story gets even better. Last month, I was contacted by a local home security company asking if they could use photos of my gate installation in their marketing materials. Apparently, word had spread in the industry about the professional quality of the installation and how it perfectly solved a property dispute problem. I agreed, and now my gate is featured on their website as an example of how proper security measures can resolve neighbor conflicts while adding property value. The irony is perfect. My neighbor's attempt to cause me problems ended up creating a marketing success story for the security industry. Meanwhile, my property has become something of a neighborhood landmark. New residents often ask about the house with the impressive gate. And I've had several neighbors comment on how professional and well-maintained the installation looks. What my neighbor saw as an eyesore, everyone else sees as a sign of a well-secured, valuable property. The cameras have also paid for themselves in unexpected ways. I've been able to help other neighbors by providing footage when they've had issues with package theft or vandalism. The high-definition video quality has been useful for identifying license plates and faces when needed. Most satisfying of all, though, is the peace and quiet. My meadow has become everything I dreamed it would be. I've expanded my garden, added a small greenhouse, and even installed a hammock between two of the oak trees. On warm evenings, I sit out there reading or just enjoying the sunset, completely undisturbed by uninvited guests or party crashers. My neighbor and I now have what I'd call a cold peace relationship. We acknowledge each other with polite nods when our paths cross, but there's no pretense of friendliness. She learned that I'm not someone who can be bullied or taken advantage of, and I learned that some people require firm boundaries backed by permanent consequences. The gate has also had an unexpected social benefit. When I do want to have friends over, the controlled access makes it feel more exclusive and private. My guests appreciate knowing they're entering a secure property, and several have commented on how the gate system makes them feel safer leaving their cars in my driveway. As for my neighbor, I heard through the local gossip network that she's been telling people she's planning to move out of state for family reasons. Whether that's true or just an excuse to escape the daily reminder of her failed power play, I don't really care. If she does move, I hope her replacement appreciates having a neighbor who takes property security seriously. The whole experience reinforced my belief that documentation and following proper procedures always wins in the end. By keeping detailed records, following all legal requirements, and implementing the security measures based on official police advice, I created an unassailable position that no amount of complaining or legal threats could touch. Every morning when my gate opens for me and closes securely behind me, I'm reminded that investing in proper solutions to problems pays long-term dividends. What started as an expensive reaction to a neighbor dispute has become a permanent improvement to my quality of life and property value. Sometimes people ask if I think I overreacted to the situation. My answer is always the same. I reacted proportionally to someone who called the police on me for standing in my own yard and tried to claim my private property as her personal park. The security measures matched the level of entitlement and aggression she demonstrated. Looking back now, I realize this whole situation taught me an important life lesson about not backing down when you're clearly in the right. Being polite and reasonable should always be the first approach, but when dealing with truly entitled people, sometimes you need to make it impossible for them to continue their bad behavior. My neighbor wanted to play games with property rights, police calls, and intimidation tactics. I responded by making the games end permanently in my favor. The gate, cameras, and signs aren't just security measures. They're a daily reminder that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences last a lot longer than people expect. The best part is that every element of my security system serves a legitimate purpose beyond just annoying my neighbor. The gate provides real security, the cameras deter actual crime, and the signs prevent genuine confusion about property boundaries. It's a perfect example of how doing the right thing for the right reasons can also happen to be the most satisfying form of justice. 6 months later, I'm still completely satisfied with how everything turned out. My property is secure, peaceful, and more valuable than ever. My neighbor learned a permanent lesson about respecting other people's property rights. And I got to solve a problem in a way that was both completely legal and thoroughly satisfying. Sometimes the best revenge really is just protecting what's yours, and letting entitled people face the natural consequences of their own poor decisions. In this case, those consequences happen to be visible from her kitchen window every single day. Thanks for reading, Reddit. Sometimes standing your ground and following through completely really does pay off in the end. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This one is fresh and still unfolding, but it's already hit an explosive level. Some details intentionally vague. Context. I'm a woman in my 30s with a reasonably good corporate-type job in a field with lots of room for growth, and am recently back into the dating scene after a decade. I'm kind of a would-be a 10 if she lost 30 pounds looking girl, beautiful face if a bit chubby, but I never have issues getting a date. I'm not well off, but I'm stable and have a bit of spending money. I live in a large multicultural city, and my ex was an immigrant, so I'm open to dating people of any origin. What happened? A few weeks ago, I met a very charming man from a Latin American country, only a couple years younger than me. Seemed very sweet, cuddly, intelligent, family-oriented, emotionally available, educated, and in a good profession back home in his country, and had a lot in common with me. Chemistry seemed amazing inside and outside the bedroom. He was honest that he was in my country on a tourist visa, but hoping to stay. I made it clear I wouldn't be able to help him with that, but we'd have a fun summer fling while he was here. If he managed to stay or come back, only then would we consider a real relationship. Then the other shoe dropped. A couple weeks and 4 dates in, during a text conversation about my work, he asked me to be his sugar mommy. I initially laughed and assumed it was a joke. He kept pushing and clearly said it wasn't. Of course, feeling insulted by this, I went off on him. He maintained it as a serious ask until I hit a nerve with my complaints about how embarrassed he should be to ask me that. Then he got angry and insulted me for thinking he was serious about it. No apology for being hurtful to me. Obviously, what I did next was take screenshots and cry about it to my closest friends. I was hurt that I was fooled into thinking he liked me and that he thought I needed to pay for a man. My friends started the fuse on what happened next. One of my friends started snooping more on his online presence. Together we found about 6 different Instagram accounts that were him using different variations of his name and different photos of himself all uploaded in batches. On Facebook, a similar pattern. All very scammy and suspicious looking. He'd been foolish enough on one of his profiles, though, to follow and tag the employer that he was working for illegally on his tourist visa in my country, so I contacted another close friend in a local law enforcement agency that works with immigration. She looked up his file. He had a wife and daughter at home. I released the hounds after that. The friend who helped me investigate online made several group chats on multiple platforms with all of his family, immediate and extended, and friends. She released all the screenshots as well as a rant about how shameful it was. As they started blocking her, she added more people. I found his sister's phone number. She sent her messages on there too. Everyone he knows, including his wife, know he's unfaithful and trying to take advantage of women. 30 months after the online bombardment started, I got a rude message from him about how I should be smart enough to know he was joking and he doesn't need to sell himself. I didn't reply. Next step? Online immigration reporting form with all the info we found, work info, employer name and address, his home address, full name, DOB, photos, screenshots admitting to working. Usually these reports take months to be reviewed, if at all, but I gave the file number to my law enforcement friend. 2 days later, law enforcement officers visited him at home. They found him with a phone number that was issued to a local resident. All his roommates also had numbers issued to the same person, a direct link to the employer. He received a caution for trying to scam me, a no-contact order, and a flag on his immigration file that, based on his country of origin, will likely mean he can never return, as well as a strict warning to not work without authorization. His roommates also received warnings. His employer received a visit next. They found significant proof that they'd been employing him illegally as well as multiple other people. Their investigation is still ongoing, but so far they are likely to receive tens of thousands in fines or possible jail time. The guy isn't getting deported because the government would have to pay for it, and proceedings take longer than his remaining visa time, but he's now upgraded from a flagged file to a multi-year ban on re-entry to my country. If he bothers me again, though, he will be deported as well. Hope he enjoys going back to his angry wife and the ridicule from everyone he knows. See you again never. Edit. The comments on my appearance are a tongue-in-cheek way of describing how he may have viewed me and speak more to his failure to select the correct victim profile. It's not that deep, and I don't really care about my appearance very much. Relax a bit, peeps. The next one is a malicious compliance story. In the late 80s, I got a job with the Ministry of Natural Resources, driving to support fighting forest fires. Great job, just over double minimum wage, major bonus at 19. And they had no limit to the number of hours you could work. Fire season started early, and by mid-May, I was supporting one that was, I think, long time ago, 400 hectares and growing quickly. 1 hectare equal sign 2.5 acres. Back then, I think the whole district was around 100,000 SQ. KM, think all of Indiana. So there was a lot of driving. One day I get to the on-site HQ and get told to wait while they found me a return load. Little later, I am told to go to the helicopter staging area to pick up the fire boss, FB. To preface, the road was crap. I pick him and a few others up and make my way back. Halfway there, I hit a deep pothole and the FB just loses it. Starts bellowing about goddamn kids speeding, no respect, etc. for the 5 minutes it takes to get back. I found out on the way there that going to fast was not a good deal, so made sure to not go faster than 15 kph, 9 miles per hour. As soon as we get to base camp, slams his way out of the truck and screams, "You're fired! Get back to district and have them process you." Okay. Duck you very much, sir. We were deep, deep in the bush. I don't know how deep, but it took me close to 7 hours to get there. Cue malicious compliance. I grabbed two 20L gas cans, 5 gallons, and set off. Real slow. If 15 kph was to fast for these roads, then the proper speed was obviously however fast the truck went at idle. Unless there was a hill, I wasn't a monster. It took 22 hours to reach the first paved road, and then I set the cruise control 5 kph below the limit and went to get fired. Extra $300 issue me. I process out and I meet one of the guys, call him Crew Boss CB, who taught the Level 1 Forest Firefighter course I took before I got hired to drive. We got along well, but there are only 2 new full-time hires that year and none on his crew. He had just come with one of his guys who broke his leg and was going to personnel to find someone new. I was quickly hired on as his 4th. 2 hours later, I'm being driven to meet his crew at a fire. Couple says later that fire is declared out and we are off to a new fire. Yep, the fire I was fired from. Kinda revenge-ish, but it get better. Cue pro-revenge. CB, it turns out, is besties with FB, so FB has our crew as the initial response crew. This meant that we spent a lot of time riding in the helicopter with FB and responding to jump fires that would take minimal time to deal with. It took a week before he recognized me, and I watched out the corner of my eye, something I thought was only in books or said as an exaggeration. This guy went from pink to red to actually turning purple. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I see the skittle flowing out as he yelled into headset, and I got some major side-eye from CB for the rest of the flight. When CB asked about it later and I explained including the drive back, he almost passed himself. Turns out, surprise, FB has a long history of exploding over nothing and taking it out on the nearest poor bastard. He ended up firing 2 more guys over the same thing, and likely the same pothole. So CB knew what he was like, but they got along really well. Turns out he also really liked poking the bear. For the rest of that fire, CB made sure I was seated, so I was the first person he saw if he looked over his shoulder. On a later fire, our crew got admin duties, and CB was FB's hash too. I gotta be as CB put his helper monkey in FB's jock itch. The rest of the crew knew, so there wasn't any friction, and they got a kick out it. It was a great summer, and I worked for CB 3 more summers through uni. Always went back with great stories, really nice money. I collected unemployment during school, not sure if it was legal, but no one said anything, and pretty sure time has run out anyway. In amazing shape, but with a really weird tan. Anyway, thank you for watching.